Hello, everyone. Welcome to Teaching with Magic, a podcast exploring the intersection of education, fantasy, and literacy. Here at Teaching with Magic, we explore the different ways that teachers in the fiction and in the real world make magic for their students. You'll hear discussions about teachers and teaching methods in fantasy, science fiction, and pop culture. You'll hear interviews with scholars in various fields about important topics in education, and you'll get to be a part of an ongoing conversation about why the imagination matters. Welcome to Teaching with Magic. Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Magic. I'm your host, Elise Trudell-Cedeno, and here at Teaching with Magic, we're investigating and evaluating teaching methods in fantasy and science fiction. Where does the fantastic classroom intersect with the primary world? And what can we teachers learn from these famous, fantastic mentors? Ooh, I alliterated. I didn't realize I did that. Haha. Today's episode is all about Qui-Gon Jinn, the Jedi Master we all know and love. What qualities, attitudes, and actions make Qui-Gon the cool teacher, Jedi Master, that every Padawan wants? Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, one whom I admire very much, and I'm so pleased that she has agreed to join me today. She is, in my humble opinion, a titan in fantasy and fandom studies, and the person I want to be when I grow up. Dr. Amy H. Sturgis holds a Ph.D. from Vanderbilt University and focuses on the intellectual history of speculative fiction. Sturgis, who teaches at Lenoir-Rhyne University and Signum University, has authored 4 books, edited and co-edited 10 others, and published more than 60 essays, many on topics related to the intersection of science fiction and history. Her most recent works include the newly published 2023 academic anthologies, Star Trek, Essays Exploring the Final Frontier, and Star Wars, Essays Exploring a Galaxy Far, Far Away, both of which she co-edited, and soon to be published scholarly essays on dark academia and the work of Lois McMaster Bujold. She has taught either an undergraduate or graduate class on Star Wars every year since 2015. And in addition, she's been interviewed as a genre expert by Life magazine, the Huffington Post, and NPR's Talk of the Nation, among other media outlets. Sturgis also contributes the Looking Back on Genre History segment to the Hugo Award-winning podcast, StarShipSofa. Amy, welcome to Teaching with Magic.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here, and thank you for that lovely introduction. We're going to have a wonderful time talking Qui-Gon Jinn.
We certainly are. And oh my goodness, Qui-Gon Jinn he's the quintessential teacher, isn't he? Like he's the cool teacher that everybody wants.
Absolutely. He's one of those characters, I think, what would he do in given situations? He's been a model for me in my adult life and in my teaching life. Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. So to get started, who is Qui-Gon Jinn? Like, where does he come from? How did he get to be a Jedi Master? What's his origin story?
Great questions. I think to answer those, I should first note, just as context, that Qui-Gon Jinn is a character with a decades-spanning multimedia presence in Star Wars. So he plays both a key role in the Lucasfilm prequel era of Star Wars. After all, we first meet him in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, the film. But he remains important in the Disney era of Star Wars and was most recently seen in the series Obi-Wan Kenobi. And we learn about him in crucial roles in the films, in series, including a really important arc in the Clone Wars series, and novels and comics that are first in the Legends category, that is pre-Disney. They're no longer technically canon, but they still heavily influence Star Wars stories today. Most notably in a series I love, Jude Watson's Jedi Apprentice series, and second in present-day canon tie-in fiction. So the upshot there is that Qui-Gon was, and he remains, a highly visible and meaningful character, and many sources inform our understanding of who he is. So who is he? He's a human Jedi Master. He was born in the core world, in fact, the galactic capital world of Coruscant. And once his Force sensitivities were identified, he was taken to and raised in the Jedi Temple, first trained with other younglings. So think Jedi elementary school with masters like Yoda teaching him. And then eventually he became Padawan, apprentice to Jedi Master Count Dooku. And then he went on to earn the rankings of Knight and Master. He was offered a seat on the Jedi Council, with which he often disagreed, and he turned it down. And as for who he is, I'd say he's known for four main things. And they are his devotion to the living Force, which sets him apart from many others, his role as master in training Obi-Wan Kenobi, whose importance to Star Wars has been there since the very beginning, his role identifying the Force sensitivity and potential of Anakin Skywalker. And without Qui-Gon Jinn, Anakin Skywalker would never have been trained as a Jedi. And lastly, for attaining consciousness or retaining his selfhood after death. In short, becoming a blue Force ghost, a glowy post-life Jedi, and then teaching other Jedi like Yoda and Obi-Wan how to do the same.
I suppose my next question then is, you mentioned that, one, in order to be a Jedi, one has to be Force sensitive, and kids were essentially identified from an early age if they were, Qui-Gon even mentions in Phantom Menace that if Anakin had been born in the Republic, he would have been identified very early on, but instead he was born in the Outer Rim in Tatooine. And so they wouldn't have been looking for him. They wouldn't have been looking for would they have been looking for Force sensitive kids out in the Outer Rim?
There is the sense that there are always those out there who are sort of casting the net widely, but certainly they're not aware in the way they would be if a child were in the Corps. So it's easy for those children to fall through the cracks.
Yeah, absolutely. So then I suppose one of the first questions I had when looking through my source material and looking through the movies was, A, how do these kids get identified? And B, how does the classroom work, as it were? Because you have the Jedi Master and Padawan apprentice relationship, but then we also had classes like the group of younglings with Yoda in the Attack of the Clones. So do you know how exactly did those, is there a process? And since you're so well versed in history, obviously, are there any resonances in cultures or in real world historical cultures that we might see reflected in how the Jedi Temple works and how the master and apprentice relationship works?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, we get the sense that there are different conduits by which students end up in the temple, whether that's parents realizing that their children are attuned to the Force and bringing them to the temple, but also Jedi outreach and being aware of. We also have examples in Ahsoka as an example of Jedi who are found in the midst of other things by other Jedi and identified and then brought in. And then, as you pointed out, they go to the temple and they're originally trained in groups to understand their Force sensitivity and to use that and to understand the purpose of the Jedi. And they're taught together to a point where they are sufficiently trained and competent in using the Force. But then, as you point out, they then become individually Padawans to different masters in an apprenticeship model that lasts for years until the Padawan is ready to face essentially final exams.
I remember Obi-Wan talking about the trials when Yoda was saying, you already have an apprentice, Qui-Gon, you can't have another one.
Right. And we get the sense there that Obi-Wan was getting close to the point where then he would become a knight himself through those trials. And then once becoming a knight, might eventually become a master himself, which of course he did. But when they're a master and apprentice, they're accepting these assignments from the Jedi Council around the galaxy. and working as a team. And so this is very much learning on the job, right? The experience, of course, varies significantly. We get the impression, based on the personalities of the two involved. And for example, in the case of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon is very much a teacher by example. So he is doing less of talking the talk and giving the lectures than he is walking the walk and letting Obi-Wan see. But also he's giving a lot of responsibility to Obi-Wan and trusting him to learn actively, experientially on the job there. And I think there are some strong historical parallels with the inspirations that George Lucas and later Star Wars creators drew on. Different examples like the samurai in Japan, and the Shaolin monks, another example. And even to a degree, and we certainly see this in the prequel trilogy because of even parallels with Order 66 and such, the Knights Templar as well. Yes. But if you think of the terms, the way we get the terms Jedi and the way we use the terms knights, there's this idea that there will be an apprenticeship model, and each knight who is going to ascend to a certain level among the Jedi will be modeled on the person with whom he or she or they study. Yeah. And it's interesting, particularly in the case of Qui-Gon Jinn, because you see sort of unlike personalities together, and that actually works quite well in certain circumstances. But you can see Obi-Wan has a lot more affinity with Yoda's relationship with the Jedi than with Qui-Gon's. And you also see later on that Luke Skywalker is being trained in a lot of ways that were influenced by Qui-Gon's influence on Yoda. And in a lot of ways, Luke is more in line with Qui-Gon's perspective than, say, Obi-Wan was. So there's also this notion of a lineage of teachers. You learn not only from your own master, but from your master's master and your master's master's master. Yeah. And there's a kind of heredity in that kind of pedagogical model.
Yeah, I definitely see that. It's interesting how, like, I was just reading Wolverton's Jedi Apprentice, the first one from the Legends material. And in that, Obi-Wan really wants to be Qui-Gon's apprentice, but Qui-Gon's going, no, I don't think this is going to work, because he's got some trauma from having Xanatos as an apprentice. Side note, all I can think of is Jonathan Frakes as Xanatos, because have you ever watched Gargoyles?
Yes.
It's like David Xanatos, the villain in Gargoyles, and that's Jonathan Frakes. Like almost the entire cast of Star Trek, The Next Generation, is in that show, and I'm just like, oh, okay, so Jonathan Frakes is Xanatos. Thank you very much. That's my headcanon now. Oh my goodness. Oh gosh, where was I going with that? But they're very different personalities, and Obi-Wan in that text, he's very impulsive, but then you have the Obi-Wan in Phantom Menace who's like, well, didn't Master Yoda say we have to do this? Didn't Master Yoda say we have to do that? And Qui-Gon's almost like that bridge between the curriculum and the experience. Like Master Yoda's like, oh, I'm all about, what the curriculum is teaching, and like the meat of the philosophy, I guess, of the Jedi. But Qui-Gon's like, okay, this is how it works in the real world.
Exactly. That's a great way to frame that, because he's consistently telling Obi-Wan, don't miss the forest, right?
Don't miss the forest of the trees. Exactly.
And this idea, yes, you should be mindful of the future, but not at the expense of the moment. You need to keep that focus on the here and now where it belongs. And in a larger sense, if you think of Qui-Gon as this sort of protracted critique of the institution of the Jedi, you see how the Jedi are becoming this sort of dogmatic, calcified, this is the way we do things. Why? Because this is the way we do things, kind of bureaucratic institution.
But the sacred texts.
Exactly. And Qui-Gon's pushing back against that and saying, we're missing our calling to further our career, right? We're missing exactly why we're doing this. And so Obi-Wan's, do not defy the council, master, not again. I shall do what I must. He's showing that, he can work inside and outside of the bureaucracy and the policy and, like you say, the curriculum, really to champion his students and to champion what he's trying to teach them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a powerful illustration of, like you say, that experience and that real world application, and that keeping the focus on why we're doing this, not how we've always done it just because.
So then how does that branch into his qualities as a teacher, not just to Obi-Wan, but also to Anakin, and in a different level even to Yoda? I remember, I can't remember the exact name of the episode in Clone Wars, but he has a moment as a Force ghost with Yoda on Dagobah. Yes. And then an arc where he leads Yoda to this wellspring planet as well. He's and that's a really interesting twist too, where the student becomes the master there. Exactly. I think because of, first of all, this metaphor, if you will, which is very much influenced by the Buddhism that inspired in part the notion of the Jedi, Qui-Gon's affinity for the living force, this idea of being present, of being aware of the moment, and of being attuned to what needs to happen now, right? He demonstrates how to be present as a teacher. He's always mindful of teachable moments. He can sort of roll with the punches, as it were, and see, not be trapped in or fossilized in his preconceived notion of what should be happening. He's flexible. He shows rather than he tells, rather than telling, I should say. And we see this, for example, in his openness to finding and championing Anakin Skywalker in the midst of helping Queen Amidala and Naboo. We see him being flexible with both Obi-Wan and Anakin, including forgiving himself, forgiving them when there are mistakes, accepting mistakes as part of the process. If you're going to do anything, sometimes you're going to do it wrong. And so what can we learn from this and move on? Pivoting when a better path presents itself. And we see over and over again, he's encouraging curiosity, imagination, initiative, growth in his students, whether that's feel, don't think, use your instincts, or even you're a much wiser man than I am. He's not trying to make Obi-Wan Qui-Gon Jinn 2.0. No. He's trying to give Obi-Wan what he needs to become a better Obi-Wan. Exactly. And even when that means he's doing something differently or doing something other than what Qui-Gon would have done. And even his openness to Anakin as a student shows how he is in the moment. Because Obi-Wan criticizes him at one point, saying, picking up another pathetic life form. But I think his devotion to the living force gives him a certain humility. And everyone he meets, whether it's a Gungan or it's a child slave on a nowhere planet, he recognizes he can be a fellow traveler with, he can collaborate with them. They can perhaps work together. And so when they're recognizing that Anakin has potential in someone that clearly everyone else, including the Jedi Council, would rather just sort of ignore, is significant. And I really appreciate, to go back to the idea that he is an outsider, and he has made himself an outsider among the Jedi. I appreciate the ways we see him working within when he can and outside of when he has to. Institutions. He's his own moral agent. He's empathetic. He's not going to let rules get in the way of that. He's devoted to the interests of his students, and also to this
humility he has, to go back to the idea of the Force, we see the Jedi being sort of committed to their own agenda and thinking, how can we use the Force to get where we think we need to go? And that's hubris, and that's in a sense hypocrisy based on what the Jedi should be doing. And Qui-Gon is much more about, how can I be a tool of the Force, this empty vessel to be filled up in the moment with what needs to happen. And that requires being flexible, that requires being open, and that requires not judging who he's working with or how he's moving away from things he might be personally connected to when a better, more productive opportunity presents itself. He's going to champion his students' interests, even if bureaucracy and policy work against them. And I also think he's, for Anakin, a gentle protector and a fierce advocate.
Yeah.
I think it's really telling later on, after he has died, that Obi-Wan says to Anakin, "You've been a brother to me." And that implies that they were both recognizing Qui-Gon as a father figure.
Yeah.
And, you know, I also think it's no coincidence that the lightsaber battle that ends in Qui-Gon's death is called Duel of the Fates. It's Anakin's fate that's hanging in the balance there. Had Qui-Gon lived, Anakin's future might have been very different indeed. And that's not any disrespect there to Obi-Wan, but Obi-Wan was an establishment Jedi, and Qui-Gon did not suffer from the dogma or hubris of the Jedi Council. And to go back to the idea of flexibility, I think that's one thing, and humility is another, that allows him to, after death, come back to Yoda. And instead of saying, "I told you so, you should have been attuned to the living Force. I told you so, you all were getting into this, you know, all of these long-term political arrangements that have left you to the Clone Wars. That's not a good deal." Instead of coming back and saying, "Look what I did, and you couldn't," he came back with this invitation to lead Yoda on a path. And it speaks a lot to Yoda as a teacher too, to realize that he's now the student, you know?
Yeah.
So, as you said, he brings Yoda to Dagobah, and they have this great mentorship experience there. And when we see Qui-Gon's instruction saying, "Here's the living Force that you missed before. Here's how to commune with it," that is a beautiful model of what Yoda will later do with Luke, complete with a cave and a dream sequence and or a vision sequence, all that stuff. So we kind of get the note there that Qui-Gon's teaching will ultimately extend to Luke as well. And then in the end, he's able to show Yoda the way to go to this wellspring planet where the Force emerges and where midichlorians thrive, and have his own experience of giving up self. And by being a supporter and encourager of Yoda there, because he's already been through this, Qui-Gon's been there and done that. He can be the kind of teacher that Yoda needs to show the way for Yoda to achieve that too. And I just think it's beautiful that because of the selflessness of his pursuit of truth in life and beyond, he then is gifted, Qui-Gon is, with this selfhood in death and the ability to teach others, Yoda, Obi-Wan, on down the line, how to be that way, how to exist, how to retain consciousness after death. And because he's the first blue glowy ghost, I think that's also a lovely kind of shout out of how great teachers who gift us with encouragement and imagination and curiosity, and how they live on for us. Right? These beacons. Exactly.
It's, and like, you know, George Lucas keeps saying, it's all poetry, it all rhymes. So as Qui-Gon passes on his wisdom to Yoda, and then Yoda passes it on to Luke, and it's all very cyclical. We do the same as teachers. You know, we're teaching our students to think for themselves, to be critical, and to not to be copy paste robots of ourselves, but we're giving them the skills to be their own critical thinkers and do it in their own way.
Exactly. And the greatest show of success possible is if the student teaches the teacher, right?
Exactly.
So,
and I'm curious about the way that, what did it take for Obi-Wan to get to that point, though? Because it's since I took the class with you, Meaning of Star Wars, and then since then we not only do we have more seasons of The Mandalorian, but we also had the show Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that's when. So it was interesting to me how Obi-Wan had this this moment, or even just several years of, he needed to figure out how to get to Qui-Gon. He needed to, so at the end of Revenge of the Sith, he's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to see my master again. I'm going to still get these moments with my master, but it takes him years to get there. And it takes until the twins are like 7-8 years old. And then, he goes to the Dune Sea and there's Qui-Gon waiting for him. And he goes, took you long enough.
Right.
So what got Obi-Wan there? Like, what was it that he needed to do? What did the student need to do in order to receive the master's information again, or receive the be open to the master's teaching again?
Oh, that's a great question, because you're right. We're told basically by the end, Qui-Gon has been there the entire time.
Yeah.
He has been there at Obi-Wan's side through these horrible, traumatic experiences, this tragic, ongoing drama that Obi-Wan has been going through. I think part of the answer may be embedded in that series, the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, because we see he has been carrying around this tremendous weight. He's in a sense, I think, kind of stuck in the past of that final battle with Anakin. Yeah. And when we see this opportunity for him to confront Anakin / Vader again, and he even apologizes, and there's this moment where I think there's closure for him.
Yeah.
And he's able to let that go. And then he can, once again, as Qui-Gon used to tell him, be in the moment. But instead of looking ahead, as he was so wont to do previously, I think he's been looking behind an awful lot.
Exactly.
And so once he can let that go and be back in the moment, that's when he realizes, my teacher's been here the entire time.
Yeah. I mean, and it's so true. And Vader has to tell him, I'm the one who made this choice.
Exactly.
You didn't make that choice for me. You may have taught me, you may have been my teacher, but I'm the one who had to pass in the test.
Exactly.
Right? And I remember I even reflected on this in a post. It reminded me of my own experiences with teacher burnout, where I just got so consumed of my own, what I perceived as my failures as a teacher.
Right.
That I couldn't get my students to do this. I couldn't get them to, or I couldn't get them passing, I couldn't get them to graduate, or I couldn't do X, I couldn't do Y. But the system was bigger than me. And the system was, and in this case with Vader, the system betrayed him, in addition to his own choices that led him to go into the dark side.
Exactly. No, I think you're quite right there. And so we see a systemic issue as well as a personal issue.
Exactly. And that's the part that I think that really hurt for Obi-Wan, was that especially as, being a one-on-one teacher, he was responsible for Anakin.
Right.
But he wasn't responsible for his fall. He was only responsible for guiding him. And I love that Obi-Wan, I should say, got that redemptive moment to be with Leia again. So that he could essentially teach Leia, so that he could eventually teach Luke, because I wonder if that was what was stopping him the entire time. Because even though he was watching over Luke, he was very much at a distance, like, oh no, I'm going to ruin him if I go anywhere near him. Like I can't ruin him like I ruined his father. But he had to go and help Leia, and in a way teach. It's such an interesting, it's so cyclical how everything in Star Wars is so cyclical. It's amazing to me.
You're so right. Oh, I agree 100%. And even to go back to what you said earlier about having to let go of this perceived failure, that goes back to what you said earlier. If you look at the Jedi Apprentice series, Qui-Gon had to do the same thing with his perceived failure with his former Padawan Xanatos, thinking I shouldn't get involved here with teaching Obi-Wan, because see what happened last time. And again, that wasn't his fault.
No.
And also he could become a great teacher when he let that go.
Yes.
So,
when you let that go, you live in the moment. And whether it's, it's being mindful of the living force, letting go of not only the past, but also the future. Oh,
love it.
Star Wars teaches us. Oh my goodness. See, this is why I do this. This is why I do this. I love it. Oh my goodness. So then what do you think Yoda got out of his experience with not only with Qui-Gon when he was alive, but with Qui-Gon when he was on Dagobah and in the other planet, and having that moment?
I think he became the Jedi that Luke would need, because he was able to pull back. When all of this is happening, they're in the midst of this calamity of the Clone Wars, which kind of crept up on them incrementally, but if you stand back and look, was essentially against the very notion of what the Jedi should be. And so their Yoda is dissatisfied, but they're kind of trapped in a trap of their own making, or at least that they consented to in certain ways. And he's able to become a Jedi who could survive Order 66 when everything fell apart. I think there's a reason he goes back to Dagobah after Order 66 and hides there. I mean, we even see him with Qui-Gon's poncho. He's using this as a blanket there in Dagobah. I think this is a shout out. I mean, again, sort of retrofitted there. He's going back to where Qui-Gon taught him to wait until everything, until he's needed again as a teacher. And he's reluctant, of course, when Luke comes there, but what he's teaching Luke about the living force, about the moment, he's even against his own will in some ways implanting some of that rebellion against dogma. Because if Luke had followed, the dogmatic don't love, it's not clinging attachment that's bad, it's all love, he would never have made that appeal to Darth Vader that saved his father in the end, right? So Luke has some of that. I think we're too caught up in the rules and we're not thinking about the why here that characterized Qui-Gon. I think Yoda learned to be in the moment, and he learned those lessons that he would need to survive the end of the Jedi and to be there to be the teacher for the next generation. And he certainly learned what Rey would need later. The lessons that he teaches Luke there on Ahch-To in the the sequel trilogy, when he's saying, get rid of the dogma, and appreciate that our students going beyond what we taught them is actually a sign of the success of our teaching. That's what happens. They move beyond us, and that's the way it works. And to give Luke what he needed to do to be the hero in the end that the galaxy needed. And if I can step sideways for a moment, going in that same sequel trilogy, it meant so much to me to hear Qui-Gon's voice speaking to Rey, both with all the Jedi and alone, because he is still there beside the Jedi, even when they can't see him.
Yes, and even when they think they don't need him.
Exactly. Still teaching.
He's still there. I love the look he gave Obi-Wan at the end. Like, I've been here the whole time.
Right.
I've been here the whole time.
Right.
Oh,
and it's clearly going to be a partnership there.
Yes.
We got work to do, right? It's not, again, he's not there to say, I told you so. He's there to get on with what needs to be done.
Exactly. Exactly. So let's see, what else do I have? Which, if I wanted to learn more about Qui-Gon, which series or books do you recommend for audience members? I know there's, like you said, when we first talked, there was Legends materials, which are post-Disney era. What do you recommend for friends to read more about Qui-Gon and who he is?
Qui-Gon is sort of everywhere. There are books, there are comics and graphic novels. If you're looking for current day canon, Claudia Gray has a novel, Master and Apprentice, that does a really nice job, I think, of carrying on the characterization we first saw in that Legends series, the Jedi Apprentice series. It's very much in harmony with that. It's not a break, it's continuity there. And we see some really important things there about Qui-Gon. I'm not going to quote this word for word, but the paraphrase, I don't follow the light because I think it's going to win. I follow the light because it's the light, right? So really great Qui-Gon moments. Also showing his iconoclastic loner, or at least outside the system side, we see him sort of thinking about or invoking, reminding Obi-Wan of the mantra of the Guardians of the Whills we met in Rogue One, and they are not Jedi, but they are connected to the Force in a different way. And I think that shows the fact that too has a bigger, the Force has a bigger reach than just through Jedi theology. And so I would suggest that novel, but I would also suggest the Jedi Apprentice series because it does still inform so much of what we know today, and we see today. The Qui-Gon in those books is also the Qui-Gon who's standing there saying, "What took you so long?" in Obi-Wan Kenobi.
It is, isn't it? Why do you think audience members, why do we resonate so much with Qui-Gon? What is it about Qui-Gon that we as audience, and you especially as a fan and a person in fandom studies?
It certainly doesn't hurt that you have Liam Neeson, both in his physical performance and voice performances over the years, the gravitas he has, the reserve. As someone who's an introvert myself, I appreciate the fact that you get the sense that he holds back and that he can be a sort of self-contained teacher and yet still convey things. He doesn't have to be the charismatic life of the party, there's a lot going on there that's earnest and powerful in his performance. So I think there's several things going on there. I think we know he cares, and so we care about him because, again, he even though he is so much on his own, there's a great quote in one of the Legends novels where Yoda says, "A true knight, Qui-Gon is forever on his own quest." He's out there doing his thing. And yet when he does make a commitment and when he does have a relationship, he's there. Yes. As we've just pointed out, he's there. His dying words are about securing Anakin's future because he has taken Anakin under his wing. Through decades of terrible things, he is still there at Obi-Wan's side. He's there at Rey's side, even though she doesn't know who he is. And so we see that he is in it for the long haul, as it were.
Yeah, literally.
Exactly. I think he resonates with fans. He certainly resonates with me because he holds to his convictions honestly, even when it's a really lonely road to follow. He could have been a superstar among the Jedi, and he instead turns down a leadership role and then is always sort of on the edge of being censored or being in some way disciplined by the Jedi Council. He's willing to defy the powers that be to do what he thinks is right. And that selflessness that humility of being able to move even between relationships, seeing each student as a future colleague, being willing to be let go of hierarchy, let go of power, to see the most humble person as a potential teacher to him.
Yeah.
And to see that, anyone he comes across may be a fellow traveler, and they may actually take a journey together that's going to make the galaxy better. I think the fact that he sticks to, and of course, a lot of the criticisms he has and a lot of the ways he stands out, we ultimately appreciate were right. And the institutions he served were making mistakes. And so there's this whole idea that he's the underdog working outside of a broken system. And if more Jedi had been like him, Star Wars history would have happened differently. There's a whole lot of what ifs there. If he had lived, would these things have happened? So I think the fact that he's doing his own thing and trying to do it purposefully and honestly with conviction, as he has a moral compass. He is trying to do right and pivoting when he realizes he can do something better. And again, I think that his devotion to the living force is something that we see in discussions of mindfulness today, being in the moment, being open to what the universe wants to teach us, and also to how we can be present to be a force for good. And how that frees us from both being trapped in the past and also consumed with worry about the future. Being here is where our students need us to be. Being here is where our subjects need us to be, right? What we're trying to convey, we need to be here for those things, or we'll miss them.
Yeah.
And so I think all of that speaks to us, certainly speaks to me. Again, the humble knight out there in his little humble poncho, just trying to keep it real out there in the dunes.
Exactly.
And trying to do the right thing and letting the consequences fall where they may for his own career, and letting the future stay in the future, but being there in the moment and not being afraid to walk that path by himself when he has to. I think all of those things make him a really inspiring character.
For sure. As you were talking, I was suddenly struck that I realized that consistently throughout Phantom Menace, he's one of the only people who gets down on Anakin's level when he's talking to him. Even just that one physical, like he will kneel down to talk to Anakin, whether he's sitting in his pod in his pod for the pod race, or he's like, this is going to be a hard life. Like this, being a Jedi is not all, it's not fancy. Like it's hard training, it's hard work. And even if you succeed, it's not an easy task. So is this what you really want? And when he's talking about midichlorians, like he's kneeling down on the ground, talking eye to eye with Anakin. And not a lot of people do that.
Exactly. And that's both physically and metaphorically not talking down to him. He treats Anakin like a person, and he doesn't loom over him, but he's also laying some pretty heavy stuff on this child, and appreciating that Anakin needs to make his own decisions at times, and is not talking down to him as a child, as a slave, all of the situation, as someone who hasn't been taught up until this point about the Jedi in any kind of organized way. He treats him like his own moral agent and like an individual. But you're right, he's also taking into consideration the fact that Anakin's small and he's huge, right? And he's getting down on his level and saying, I'm coming to you.
Yeah. And
I'm talking to you like you are a person who gets to make his own decisions about his life. And that's very powerful.
Yeah. Especially when you contrast with Obi-Wan, who, without even knowing him, calls him a pathetic life form. Oh, Obi-Wan. Bless his heart.
Even connecting with the Gungans and doing that, he's open to what the moment needs, but he also even when he can be wry and even when he can be sort of over it, and a little tired of things, he's not dismissive of people.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I think that's huge too.
It is. Especially when the Gungans are so used to being dismissed.
Yes.
But on their own planet. They are
Right.
dismissed on their own planet. Come on, people.
I think there's an undercurrent of his appreciation too, which I think comes back to, once again, this whole living force thing.
Yeah.
But Qui-Gon is really attuned to this idea of symbiosis.
Mhm.
And whether that's us and midichlorians, whether that's, hey, the Gungans and the people of Naboo, they're actually all connected together and they need to be in balance, right?
Mhm.
And seeing how things interrelate and rely on each other, and how actions, resonate and affect across those connections. I think he's, again, seeing both a much more nuanced and a much bigger picture than a lot of other people.
I love how he can do that. He can see the small moments and how they affect the bigger moments to come, but he's still present in that moment. He's not worrying about the future in the way that Obi-Wan is.
Right.
I'm constantly going back to that first moment where Obi-Wan's like, I have a bad feeling about this, Master. And Qui-Gon says, that's fine, just not at the expense of the present. If you can have that bad feeling, just concentrate on the here and now, because, we're about to be shot by the Trade Federation, but, what are you going to do about that?
Right. And there's another great illustration of exactly what you're saying during the Duel of the Fates.
Yes.
When you see Qui-Gon kneel and meditate versus, Obi-Wan just pacing back and forth about to explode. And you see there are very different approaches to, the moment there.
Yeah.
And Qui-Gon's this sort of study in humility, whereas Obi-Wan's a study in impatience,
And even Darth Maul, like he's pacing back and forth too. He's ready to go. He's ready to cut this guy down. Great segue to my next question, which is, what if Qui-Gon had survived the Duel of the Fates? I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but even just like talking about how it would have affected Anakin himself as a student, let alone Obi-Wan, Yoda, living forth, all of that. What if Qui-Gon had survived? So much would have changed.
Yes, boggles my mind. I think so many things would have been different. Again, going back to Legends materials, there's at least one novel that suggests that Qui-Gon was already prepared to ignore the sanctions against connecting to the past, connecting to the family, I should say, because he was already, preparing to talk to Shmi. And if you think about how ridiculous it was for the Jedi to assume that this child who's older, who has been dependent on and in a very close and loving relationship with his mother, that it would benefit him somehow to completely sever that relationship. That's one of the key seeds of his desire for this grasping love of not losing people, which is completely against the Jedi idea. But you can see how that would be fostered by this traumatic break with his mother.
Yeah,
I think Qui-Gon would have not heeded that kind of dogmatic approach. This is a unique situation. Let's treat it uniquely. Let's treat it like a case-by-case basis. And in this case, we need to maintain a relationship with Shmi. We need to let a son and mother have some kind of contact, or at least know how the other is doing. And I think without that fear of loss growing inside of Anakin, we wouldn't have seen what he did to avenge his mother. We wouldn't see what he does out of fear of losing Padme. He would have become a different kind of Jedi, and he would have had someone he could talk to. I'm not sure if Qui-Gon would have remained a Jedi. He certainly wouldn't have become a Sith like his master, but he might have finally left. He certainly, I don't think he would have been a part of the Clone Wars, or at least he would have been a loud voice of protest against it, that would have changed things for Anakin a great deal too. So
Yeah.
I think it would have been a very different world and a very different galaxy. And I think it's also, again, one of those lovely lessons Star Wars teaches us, that it can be a lonely voice out there, starting a movement or starting a protest that can change things. Could everything we know have happened with Qui-Gon in the universe? No, he had to be taken out in a sense. Yeah. And I may be giving too much credit to him, but I think he also would have had a tremendous influence on others who saw the truth of what he was, what he was about. I think it would have been a different story.
Oh, for sure. And, I think you're not giving him enough credit personally. I think he's like, I feel like he would have seen Palpatine for who he was.
I think you're right.
It's so much. I've been watching this film since I was like 10 years old. And every time I watch it, I realize more and more just the seeds that Palpatine planted from early on. I don't think I appreciated as a child, but as I grew up, I saw like, oh, he really is manipulating Padme into getting rid of the Chancellor. He's really he's planting himself in this space so that he can take over. And I feel like Qui-Gon would have seen it for what it was sooner. Maybe he would have at least tried. Maybe he would have tried to convince the other Jedi Masters, like, hey, there's something shady going on.
Yes. Yes.
It's just it still amazes me that they never caught. They distrusted him by the time Revenge of the Sith came around, but the fact that nobody ever caught that there was at least something dark or malevolent around Palpatine is still, maybe it's because they were so focused on the dogma and the written rule as opposed to what Qui-Gon is about, which is the experience and the real life applications of the Force. It's just, I don't know why nobody caught that.
I think it's a powerful kind of reverse lesson too. If you think about, obviously Star Wars has a whole lot of inspirations, but one of them is clearly from the start, and George Lucas has spelled this out.
Yeah.
It is about history repeating and finding those patterns. And in the case of the prequel trilogy, it's very much about this pattern of republics or democracies voting away their rights into the hands of tyrants. And you've got, the Roman Republic becoming the Roman Empire, and you've got Napoleon because, after the French Republic, and then you've got Nazi Germany.
Yep.
And that's the clearest parallel there with the rise of Palpatine. But it also has this embedded suggestion that there could be people like Qui-Gon next time who could stand up and say, hey, I don't think we're focusing on the right things here. Who could actually break those kinds of cycles. And so it's an Easter egg of hope. Embedded in that idea that patterns repeat, that there could be people of good conscience who aren't trying to bring more power, concentrate power in themselves, but are simply trying to stop a combination of the concentration of power in other people's hands and the sort of calcification of institutions that just kind of become self-perpetuating machines rather than about what they were originally intended to do.
Exactly. I wonder, do you think Qui-Gon would he have tried to face off Palpatine on his own, or do you think he would have, I'm spitting out all kinds of theories here. Do you think he would have gone toe to toe with Palpatine himself, or do you think he would have, I don't know, what would have happened if he were around for Revenge of the, perhaps the Clone Wars wouldn't have even happened, but if he were around for Revenge of the Sith instead of Mace Windu, or even instead of Anakin, or
Right.
Yoda. Like what I wonder what would have happened.
I do too. I wonder as well. I don't know. I think it would have been such a different landscape by that point, because I don't think Anakin would be. I think Anakin would have had a very different approach. He wouldn't have been vulnerable to those kinds of whisperings. You know, I can save you from losing someone else. I think it's entirely possible he wouldn't have been a Jedi at that point if the Clone Wars had happened. And so he would have removed himself as his own moral agent, sort of, you know, the Ronin
samurai.
knight.
Yeah,
exactly. Character under his own employ in a way. Certainly he would have felt a great deal of responsibility, I think, for Anakin, for Obi-Wan, but also for he wants balance in the Force. He wants the best outcome possible, and to restore all those symbiotic relationships that are supposed to nurture, and this is the ultimate disruption and the ultimate violence in the galaxy. He would have tried to do something. I don't know how successful he would have been, but it would. I think you're right. I think he would have been a force, no pun intended, in this whole story that would have changed things dramatically.
But everything also happened the way they were supposed to happen. I mean, that's the hard part about watching the prequels, I think, is that we don't want Anakin to fall, but we know he has to fall in order for Luke to be successful.
True. There's that tension between the sort of free will destiny thing there. That's rough to square that circle sometimes. But you're right. It did happen. It did happen the way, and Qui-Gon would say, we shouldn't be focused on what's already happened.
That's true. You would have said that, but it's also the student. I as much as we want the student to pass the test, we have to let them fail the test so that they can figure out that they need to study for the test next time. It's so hard. It's like, I want to give you the answers, kid, but no, I can't tell you the answers. You have to come to them yourself. It's so hard.
There's that moment, isn't there, when Anakin turns and we know and we hear Qui-Gon shout no. We hear his voice.
We hear him when he kills. Yes. When Anakin kills the Tusken Raiders that hurt his mom. I was probably like 12, 13 when I first heard that, and my heart just broke.
Yes. And did Anakin hear it? And if so, did he ignore it? Or are we just knowing that Qui-Gon sees it and is brokenhearted by it? Again, he's there.
He's there.
Whether they're ready to see him or not.
Yeah. I feel like Anakin heard it, but he was so angry and clouded by his anger that, because he even says no, right? It's like, Anakin, no, and I can't remember if it's Qui-Gon's. I thought it was Anakin's voice that's saying no, like, no, I'm rejecting your teachings right now, Qui-Gon, because I'm so angry that they killed my mother.
Oh, that certainly makes sense. Yes.
And it's so hard. It's so hard when you see the student that you want to succeed, but either a choice that they make or something in their path just gets in their way. You're like, I have to let you be a student right now. I have to let you be a human. I can't do this for you.
Right. No, you're right. He is calling his name. That's now that you jogged my memory there. That's right. So the implication is, yes, that he can hear, but again, even if he can hear, mistakes must be made, and B, Anakin is making that choice. Just like he made the choice to fall, and he recognizes that he made the choice to be Vader when he's facing against Obi-Wan in the series, in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. He's like, no, I made this choice. You did not fail me. I made this choice. Right.
Oh, it's so hard. It's so hard.
And yet we know down the road,
it'll be okay.
When Rey says, be with me, and is open to him and to the other Jedi, they are there, right?
They are there.
When she's saying help, he's right there. And so are the others, including those he taught.
Yes. Did he teach Kanan Jarrus? Side note. Who taught Kanan Jarrus? I can't remember.
He worked with Kanan's mentor. I can see her face. Oh, I'm going to be so upset that I can't get the name out.
Bib, not Bib. No, that's the other person. That's a bounty. That's one of Jabba's people. Bib Fortuna is one of Jabba's people. What am I saying? That's not a Jedi.
But they worked together.
Yeah.
And she was there at his funeral, actually.
Yes. What is her name?
Speaking of
Depa Balaba, that's it.
Yes.
I knew I knew there was a B in there. I knew there was a B in there.
That's right. That's right. And she gave her life protecting him.
Yes.
And so she clearly had a very good collegial relationship with Qui-Gon, and went out to Naboo when he was, to remember and honor Qui-Gon. So that's a big deal. I'm sure there was some cross-pollination there in terms of being colleagues who influenced each other's work, right?
Yeah. I mean, knowing Qui-Gon and oh my gosh, I just punned. What a force he was. Knowing Qui-Gon.
Well said. Beautifully said.
Oh gosh, I cringed at myself. What a force he was, just even not only to his students, but to other teachers. I'm sure there was some cross-pollination, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Oh goodness. I could talk about Qui-Gon all day long. But that's all the questions that I had written down. Oh no. I don't want to end. I never want to stop talking about this. This is great. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about a teacher from whom we both learned, Qui-Gon Jinn. If I turn my head here in my office, I've got my little sign. Always remember, your focus determines your reality. Right there.
Right there.
He's telling Anakin, and he's telling us. So sharing that with us. But I really do think it's wonderful to see the ripple effects that his good faith efforts had throughout that universe, and also just how we can take a fictional character like this and draw lessons that we can then employ and say, I admire this. In these ways, I feel, very much like Qui-Gon in personality or an outlook. So but here are ways that I am very different than Qui-Gon. How can I cultivate these kinds of approaches so that I can be a fellow traveler with my students? I can see my students as future colleagues. I can appreciate that the students will teach the teacher, and also just be open to the moment, which in the times we're in can be very, very difficult. But I think it's one of those lasting lessons. We miss the opportunities if we're thinking about what we did wrong in the past, or if we're worried about what could go wrong in the future, we're not doing right in the present,
Agreed. We don't want to have any little Anakins in our classrooms, do we? Anakins, no. Yes. Vaders, no.
And we don't want any grown Anakins in our younglings groups.
Oh dear. That would be no good.
No.
Amy, thank you so much for being here. And I hope to, if it's all right with you, I hope to invite you to another episode in the future, talk some more Star Wars, talk some more genre history, talk more nerd things everywhere, because this is just, I would love to have you back.
I would love that. Absolutely. Anytime. And I also just want to congratulate you on this podcast, because I think you're doing really entertaining, exciting, but also important work with this podcast. So thank you for nourishing and feeding us through these episodes.
Thank you so much. Now I'm blushing. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or your other favorite podcast feeds. If you enjoyed listening, please leave a rating and a review as well. You can read and find out more about Teaching with Magic by visiting our website, teachingwithmagic.blog. You can leave a message on our podcast page, read past Teaching with Magic posts, and check out our book lists on our affiliate page. We also invite you to support us on Patreon. You'll have access to bonus material, our Discord channel, live Q&As, and you'll get a sneak peek at future products such as lesson plans, worksheets, and other teaching tools. The link is always available in our show notes and the podcast page on our website. Thanks again for joining us, and as always, keep making magic.